Assyria, Neo-Assyrian cuneiform, Romanized, Mat Ashur, Classical Syriac, Romanized, Athor, was a major ancient Mesopotamian civilization that existed as a city-state from the 21st century BC to the 14th century BC and later as a state territory, a kingdom from the 14th century BC to the 7th century BC. Stretching from the early Bronze Age to the late Iron Age, modern historians generally divide the history of ancient Assyria into Early Assyrian c. 2600–2025 BCE, Old Assyrian c. 2025–1364 BCE, Middle Assyrian c. 1363–912 BCE, Neo-Assyria 911–609 BC, and the post-imperial period 609 BCC. 240 AD, based on political events and gradual changes in language. Ashur, the first Assyrian capital, was founded c. 2600 BC, but there is no evidence that the city was independent until the collapse of the Third Dynasty of Ur in the 21st century BC, when a line of free kings starting with Puzur-Ashur I began to rule the city. Centered in the heart of Assyria in northern Mesopotamia, Assyrian power fluctuated from time to time. The city experienced several periods of foreign rule and domination before Assyria ascended under Ashur-uballit I in the 14th century BC as the Middle Assyrian Empire. In the Middle and Neo-Assyrian periods, Assyria was one of the two main Mesopotamian kingdoms, alongside Babylon in the south, and was at times the dominant power in the ancient Near East. Assyria was the strongest in the Neo-Assyrian period, when the Assyrian army was the strongest military power in the world and Assyria ruled the largest then unassembled empire in world history, stretching from modern-day Iran in the east to Egypt in the west. The history of the discovery of the kingdom. The name, Ashur, is first attested for the site in documents from the Akkadian period in the 24th century BC. Throughout most of the early Assyrian period, about 2600–2025 BC, Ashur was dominated by states and governments from southern Mesopotamia. Initially, Ashur temporarily fell under the loose hegemony of the Sumerian city of Kish and was later occupied by the two Akkadian empires and later the Third Dynasty of Ur. In c. 2025 BC, due to the collapse of the Third Dynasty of Ur, Ashur becomes an independent city-state under Puzur-Ashur. Ashur came under the Puzur-Ashur dynasty, which had a population of less than 10,000 and probably had very limited military strength. No military institutions at all are known since then and no political influence was exerted in the neighboring towns. The city is still influential in other ways. Under Ereshkigal I.R. c. 1974–1934 BC, Ashur experimented with free trade, the earliest known such experiment in world history, leaving the initiative for large-scale foreign trade and transactions entirely to the people rather than the state. The thrust of the trading empire caused Ashur to quickly establish itself as a leading trading city in northern Mesopotamia and soon thereafter to build extensive long-distance trade networks, the first important impression Assyria left in recorded history. Among the remaining evidence of this trading network is a large collection of ancient Assyrian cuneiform tablets from the Assyrian trading colonies, most notably a set of 22,000 clay tablets found at Kultepe, near the modern city of Kayseri in Turkey. Assyrian Empire. Ashur-uballit I was the first native Assyrian ruler to claim the royal title Ar-King. Shortly after achieving independence, he further claimed the dignity of a great king at the level of the Egyptian pharaohs and Hittite kings. The Assyrian rise was linked to the decline and fall of the kingdom of Mitanni, its former suzerain, which allowed the early Middle Assyrian kings to expand and consolidate territory in northern Mesopotamia. Under warrior king Adad-nirari I reigned 1305–1274 BCE, Shalmaneser I reigned 1273–1244 BCE, and Tukulti-Ninurta I m. c. 1243–1207 BCE, Assyria began to realize its aspirations to become a significant regional power. These kings campaigned in all directions and incorporated large swathes of territory into the burgeoning Assyrian Empire. Under Shalmaneser I, the last remnants of the Mitanni kingdom were officially annexed to Assyria. The most successful of the central Assyrian kings was Tukulti-Ninurta I, who brought the Middle Assyrian Empire to its greatest extent. His most notable military achievement was his victory at the Battle of Niria c. 1237 BC, which marked the beginning of the end of Hittite influence in northern Mesopotamia, and the temporary conquest of Babylonia, who became a vassal of Assyria c. 1225–1216 BC. Tukulti-Ninurta was also the first Assyrian king to try to move the capital city from Ashur, inaugurating the new city Kar Tukulti-Ninurta as the capital c. 1233 BC. The capital was returned to Ashur after his death. The Assyrian retreat. Despite the violent fall of the Assyrian Empire, Assyrian culture continued to endure into the subsequent post-imperial period 609 BC to 40 AD and beyond. The Assyrian heartland experienced a dramatic decline in the size and number of settlements inhabited during the reign of the Neo-Babylonian Empire founded by Nabopolassar. The former capitals of Assyria, Ashur, Nimrud, and Nineveh were almost completely abandoned. Throughout the Neo-Babylonian and later Achaemenid empires, Assyria remained a marginal and sparsely populated region. By the end of the 6th century BC, the Assyrian dialect of Akkadian became extinct, as by the end of the Neo-Assyrian Empire it had been largely replaced by Aramaic as the vernacular language. Under the empire that replaced the Neo-Babylonians, from the late 6th century BC onwards, Assyria began to recover. Under the Achaemenids, most of the territory was organized into the province of Athura, Ara. The organization of one large province, the lack of interference by the Achaemenid rulers in local affairs, and the return of Assyrian cult statues to Ashur soon after the Achaemenids conquered Babylon facilitated the survival of Assyrian culture. Under the Seleucid Empire, which ruled Mesopotamia from the late 4th to the mid-2nd century BC, Assyrian sites such as Ashur, Nimrud and Nineveh were resettled and large numbers of villages rebuilt and expanded. Assyrian military. The Assyrian army throughout its history consisted largely of levies, mobilized only when needed, such as during campaigns. Through sophisticated regulations, obligations, and systems of government, large numbers of armies could be recruited and mobilized in the early Middle Assyrian period. The Assyrian army developed and evolved over time. In the Middle Assyrian period, marching soldiers were divided into Sar-Bua Kaka armed forces, and Sar-Bua Arit protective forces, but extant records are not detailed enough to determine what the differences were. It is possible that Sar-Bua Kaka included ranged troops, such as slingers Abua Usp, and archers Abua Kalt. The chariots in the army consisted of their own units. The number of soldiers in the Neo-Assyrian army was probably several hundred thousand. The Neo-Assyrian army was further subdivided into Kisru, perhaps 1,000 soldiers, most of whom were infantry soldiers ZK, Zukorixt. Infantry is divided into three types: light, medium and heavy, with a variety of weapons, armor levels and responsibilities. During the campaign, the Assyrian army used many interpreters, translators Targumanu, and guides Radi Kibsi, both probably drawn from foreigners living in Assyria. The Assyrian economy. In the Old Assyrian period, most of the population of Ashur was involved in the international trade of the city. As can be gleaned from hiring contracts and other records, trafficking involved people from a wide variety of occupations, including porters, guides, donkey drivers, agents, merchants, bakers, and bankers. Because extensive cuneiform records are known from the period, the details of the trade are relatively well known. Estimated only in period c. 1950–1836 BC, 25 tons of Anatolian silver were transported to Assur, and about 100 tons of tin and 100,000 textiles were transported to Anatolia in return. The Assyrians also sold livestock, processed goods, and reed products. In many cases, the materials sold by the Assyrian invaders came from far away. The textiles sold by the Assyrians in Anatolia were imported from southern Mesopotamia, and the tin came from the east in the Zagros Mountains. After international trade declined in the 19th century BC, the Assyrian economy became increasingly state-oriented. In the Neo-Assyrian period, the wealth generated through private investment was dwarfed by the wealth of the state, which was by far the largest employer in the empire and had a monopoly over agriculture, manufacturing, and mineral exploitation. The empire's economy primarily benefited the elite, as it was structured in such a way as to ensure that excess wealth flowed into the government and was then used for the maintenance of the state throughout the empire. While all means of production were owned by the state, there also continued to be a dynamic private sector of the economy within the empire, with individual property rights guaranteed by the government. That is a brief history of the Assyrian Empire quoted from Wikipedia.org. Hope it is useful. Thank you.